On this episode, we're going to build a really simple DIY bookcase. So this project was part of a collaboration that I'm doing with Mike Clifford from Industrial Maker, Keith Brown from Rag & Bone Brown, and HiKOKI, or if you live in North America, Metabo HPT. The short version goes like this. The three of us wanted to set some parameters for what tools we'd use in our builds, and we decided we'd keep it simple, pretty much using a circular saw, a drill, and a random orbit sander, plus clamps and squares and screws and all that stuff. And stay tuned to the end of the video to hear about how you can win some of the tools you see me using. So in this shot, I'm setting up to remove the factory edge from my sheet of plywood. And you don't have to do this, but it's usually a little bit rougher, so if you can spare it, I think it's always a good idea to get rid of it. Now, technically you can make every cut that you need to make for this entire project using this method of measuring, clamping a straight edge, and cutting with a circular saw. But it would be pretty slow and not ideal since we're going to be making a lot of repetitive cuts, so I'm only going to make this one cut using this method, and then we'll go over some alternatives as we make other cuts. But no matter how you decide to cut your pieces, here's what you're going to need to cut. We'll start by ripping 4 pieces to 11 3/4 of an inch wide. I'm using 3/4 inch Baltic birch, and the whole project will take all of a 4x8 sheet and a small amount of a 5x5 sheet. From our strips, we're going to cut 4 pieces to 70.5 inches, 2 pieces to 36 inches, and 8 pieces to 10.5 inches. And then here you can see how the whole thing's going to come together. So the key to this project is repeatability. So to rip all of my strips, I'm going to be using this attachment called the Craig Rip Cut. It just goes right onto your circular saw and makes it really easy to quickly repeat cuts. Again, you can use a long straight board, but it means remeasuring and clamping exactly the same every time. Though technically, depending on how thick your material is, you can stack and cut multiple pieces at the same time, so those are ensured to be the same width. And you'll see me use that technique a little later. For cross-cutting our pieces to length, a really good option would be a miter saw, but we're not using those. So here I'm going to use a square as a guide for my circular saw. And really anything will do. Like one of these speed squares that you can pick up for a couple bucks is fine. Also, just out of curiosity, I tried to cross-cut one using the rip guide just to see what it was like, but I think that that's a bad idea and I would not recommend it. In this shot here, I'm clamping 2 pieces together. And like I was saying before, this is a really good method for ensuring that things come out equal. For example, I needed 2 vertical sides, so even if I'd cut them wrong here, they would still be equal, since it's just one cut. In these next couple shots, I'm drilling a bunch of pocket holes into my pieces, and that's what I'm going to use to attach everything. And I think that this is a really good way to go, but you could also just use screws in a more regular fashion to attach everything, like you see me doing in these shots. The only tip that I'd give here is take a couple extra minutes to mark out screw locations, so that way that they'll be in line and they'll just look organized, and you're going to end up with a much better finished look in my opinion. Also, I like to countersink my screws for, again, a cleaner look. Okay, so at this point we could start assembling, but I think this is actually a good time to put on any paint, stain, or finish that you're going to want to use, just because it's easier to get to everything at this point since there's no inside corners or trying to wipe things on upside down and so forth. So my initial idea was to paint my vertical partitions a few different colors. I wanted to use the same color scheme that I used on my workbench, and I had a lot of paint left over, so I grabbed that from the shop to use. And I don't know if I grabbed the wrong stuff or what happened, but as I was putting it on, I was just really not liking the colors at all. So my next step was to try to modify them to something that I did like, but I still wasn't really feeling it, so I scrapped that idea, cut out some new vertical partitions, and decided to just use India ink to make them all black instead. For a finish, you can use pretty much anything that you want, but my go-to is always Simple Finish with Wax by Maker Brand Co. Of course, I'm a little bit biased since I'm 1/6 owner of it, so just take my recommendation with a grain of salt if you like. To assemble everything, you're going to see me using these Woodpecker clamping squares, just because they're a little bit faster. But again, you don't need them. Really, the main purpose is to keep the joint tight while you're screwing things together. So a really cheap alternative is you can get 2 F-style clamps and a scrap of block wood, and just do what you see me doing here. And if you do use this method, just make sure it isn't covering up your pocket screws. No matter what clamping method you use, I'd recommend starting by attaching the top shelf to the top of the 2 vertical side pieces. Once those are attached, with the whole thing flipped upside down, I'm using 2 vertical partitions as spacers to position my next shelf. Then you can literally just work your way up, attaching all 4 shelves, and you'll be sure that everything's evenly spaced. After all 4 were attached, I took some of my leftover wood and used the gap at the bottom to mark out and cut a few little spacer blocks that are going to go on the underside of the bottom shelf. And these are there so that there's no long unsupported spans that could cause the shelves to want to sag. And to attach them, I'm just using a little glue. No clamping necessary. The next day I could start installing my vertical partitions. And here you're seeing my biggest regret of this project. Basically, I really wish that I had spaced the shelves about 1/2 inch further apart. I made it just slightly too tight for my drill with the pocket hole bit, which is quite long, to be able to fit. So I had to start each screw manually, and then once there was enough clearance, I could drive it home. And I realized a few minutes into this that I was missing something pretty crucial. That's better. After that, I could just keep working my way up to install the rest of the vertical partitions. I hope that the main takeaway from this project is just about spending those few extra minutes to do things cleanly. Whether that's marking out screw locations or striking a line at 90 degrees so that you know that your partitions are inserted perfectly perpendicular to the edge, all these little things add up, and they can make a project take an extra hour or 2, but I think that it really shows in the end result. So try to find those little things that you can do to be more consistent or to yield a cleaner result, and then take the time to actually do them. Okay, the giveaway. So at the time that I'm recording this, all of the details of the HiKOKI giveaway haven't been finalized, but they should be by the time that you're watching. So make sure to check the description for all the details and all the links, so that way you can participate. All right, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.